Hey, this is Dr. Barry. I'm a family physician and the author of Lies My Doctor Told Me. Today, I want to talk to you about a very important topic. It's a topic that many people have some confusion on, and I want to try to set as many of these things straight as I can today with a little deeper dive into sugar addiction. Is it real? If it is, how do you beat it? 6 ways you can tell if you suffer from a sugar addiction, and 7 ways you can fix it. So let's talk about sugar addiction and how to beat it. If you know someone who you think is a sugar addict, please share this video with them on their social media. You can write them a letter, you can send them a text or an email, but make sure they get this information because many people don't believe sugar addiction is real. If they suffer from a sugar addiction, then there's going to be bad medical and mental problems in their future, and you can help prevent that for them by sharing this video. So let's get started. First of all, why is sugar bad, and where's sugar at? And let's start there, and then we're going to dive down into this. So, why is eating lots of sugar bad in the first place? Well, when you eat a lot of sugar, you spike your blood sugar level. This immediately spikes your insulin level. Your insulin level is going to make you store fat. It's going to make it almost impossible for your body to burn fat. So, if one of your goals in life is weight loss or fat loss, you're not going to do that if you're eating lots of sugar. Eating lots of sugar leads to chronically high blood sugars and chronically high insulin levels, which lead to cavities in your teeth. It leads to diabetes. It leads to severe acne, obesity, fatty liver, chronic joint inflammations, chronic skin rashes. The list goes on and on and on. Sugar is not your friend. Sugar is bad for human beings. Never in the history of our existence on this planet have we eaten as many pounds of sugar a year as we do now. Never, not even close. Okay. So now, secondly, where's sugar at? So we all know that sweets and soft drinks and fruit juices, these have sugar. We know that. But here's the problem. And this is very confusing for some people with sugar addiction. Some people with sugar addiction don't like sweet foods. They don't like sweets. They don't like cookies, cakes, pies, desserts, but they're still a sugar addict. And here's how. If you are a chip addict, then you're a sugar addict because the carbohydrates, the processed carbohydrates in potato chips or corn chips or tortilla chips, all of these break down immediately in your stomach to glucose and fructose, which are sugars, right? If you love bread, if any kind of bread, whether it's bread sticks, whether it's fresh made bread at home, whether it's organic bread grown from stone ground wheat, all this breaks down immediately to glucose and fructose in your blood. A lot of people think eating fruit is healthy. Maybe some seasonal fruit is not too bad for you, but eating lots of fruit every day, if you make that big fruit smoothie every morning and pulverize the fruit so you don't even have to chew it, guess what that breaks down to immediately in your digestive system? Did you guess? Glucose, fructose, right? And so, really, any of these foods are going to create a sugar addiction and perpetuate a sugar addiction. And so, many people who consider their diet very healthy, oh, I only eat stone ground tortilla chips and I have a huge fruit smoothie 2 or 3 times a day, you could absolutely be a sugar addict. So, now, how does this work? How do you get addicted to sugar? Why is it sugar? Why is it not protein? Why is it not fat? Great question. So sugar causes a big dump of dopamine into the synapses in your brain in the pleasure centers. And so you get this dopamine release when you eat sugars. And it doesn't have to taste sweet, like I said earlier. It can be savory, but it's all about the carbohydrates, the simple processed carbohydrates. That's what's going to lead to sugar addiction because it spikes dopamine release in these neurons in your pleasure centers, and then you get this dopamine high. Now, and so, for example, cocaine is very habit forming. There's no doubt about this. We don't have any doubts. And so, how is it addictive? Well, what it does is it keeps the synapse from taking up the dopamine. I mean, it keeps the receptor from taking up the dopamine out of the synapse. And so, you build up a lot of dopamine in the synapse, just like with sugar, except cocaine just does it a different way. But the net result from both is that you have a lot of dopamine available for your receptors and you get a dopamine high. Obviously, Cocaine and other drugs give you more of a dopamine response and more of a high and are much more addictive, there's no doubt. And the consequences of their addiction are typically much worse acutely. But for many people, sugar addiction is just as bad. Now, why is there all this disagreement about whether there is a sugar addiction thing or not? Why do you see on some sciencey websites that there's no such thing as this? You just like good food. Well, here's why. Big food and big pharma make billions of dollars every year if you're a sugar addict. They don't want you to believe that it's a real thing. It would not be in their best interest. Their stock price would go down. And so they're happy for you to believe this. And they're not just going to come straight out and say there's no such thing as a sugar addiction. They're going to pay for research studies that seem to show that sugar addiction's probably not a real thing, or that it's a real thing in rats and rodents, but it's probably not real in humans. That way there's some doubt, and therefore you are at your liberty to eat all of the sweets and the chips and the breads and drink the sodas and the fruit juice and continue your sugar addiction and continue their billion-dollar profit. That's why you hear kind of conflicting evidence on this. Now, how do you tell if you have a sugar addiction or really any other addiction? There's 7 questions that you can ask yourself, and these are actually scientifically validated questions. If you answer yes to 3 or more of these, then you have an addiction to whatever the substance in question is, or at least it's highly likely that you have an addiction. So let's go over these 7 questions. Number 1, have you ever hidden sweets or chips or grains or cokes or anything like that? Have you ever hidden that kind of stuff or hidden the knowledge of it from a loved one or a family member or a friend? People don't hide bacon, right? You don't hide, you just eat your bacon. And so it's not just that it's a tasty food and you really love it, so you want to hide some to make sure you have it later. If you're hiding things, if you're hiding a liquor bottle or the cocaine or you're hiding the Oreos, you've got a problem. That's number 1. That's a problem. That's not okay. Number 2, have you ever made deals with yourself? Like, now, if I can get this project done, then I'm going to go have a Blizzard or a Flurry or a pack of Oreos. Any kind of deal making like that is that's sometimes a problem. Not always, but that's just one of the questions. Number 3, have you ever spent more time or money buying or eating sweets or chips or grains or soft drinks or anything like that, breads? If you've ever spent more than you meant to or spent more time than you meant to, that could be a sign of addiction. Next, have you ever neglected a responsibility or been late to show up to pick somebody up or late for a meeting because you were busy eating or thinking about or buying sweets, breads, chips, soft drinks? If so, that could be a sign of addiction. Number 5, have you ever felt the need to cut down on your sweets, on your chips, on your breads, on your soft drinks, fruit juices? Have you ever felt the need to cut back? Because if you have, that's a big red flag. You might have an addiction. Has a friend or a loved one ever said to you, I think you have a problem with sweets or chips or bread or Cokes or whatever? That's a red flag. You might have an addiction. Next is, do you ever think about or fantasize about your favorite carbohydrate, that bag of chips that you left at home and forgot to bring to work, or that dessert you're going to have for lunch? That's a problem. If you fantasize or overly think about the carbohydrates, that could be a sign of addiction. Next, have you ever used sweets or chips or breads or Cokes or any kind of carbohydrate to self-soothe after a rough day at work or after a fight with a spouse or a relative? Have you ever went to the sweets, the cookies, the cakes, the pies, the bread, the breadsticks, the potato chips as a means of self-soothing? If you have, that's a big red flag that you might have an addiction. And so if you answered yes to 3 or more of these questions, then it's highly likely you are addicted to sugars, and not just sweet tasting sugars. It can be all the sugars that we talked about in the breads, in the chips, in the fruits, in the soft drinks. Any of those things can lead to and perpetuate sugar addiction. Now, let me give you an example of how, because some people will say, well, if you just like bacon, you might fantasize about bacon and you might think about it. That's true. But now we got to talk about withdrawals, okay? Because if I love bacon, let me just say that as a way of self disclosure. I love bacon. I eat as often as I can. Sometimes I may fantasize about bacon. Oh, sorry. But if you forbid me to ever eat bacon again, if you ever took my bacon out of the house and locked me in the house and I couldn't have bacon for a month, I would miss bacon, but it would be an intellectual miss. It would not be a feeling. It would not be a pervasive, overarching feeling of bacon withdrawal. It just wouldn't. I'd find some other protein. I'd eat ribeye. I'd eat eggs. I'd eat something else. But I would miss my bacon, but I would not go through withdrawal. So what are some of the symptoms of withdrawals? So anybody who's ever smoked cigarettes or drank alcohol too much, and you had to stop those in order to break an addiction, the symptoms of withdrawal are agitation, anxiety, headache, insomnia, having trouble getting to sleep. If you have body aches, you can have nausea, you can have stomach cramps, you can have muscle cramps, joint aches, muscle aches. All of these things mean that your body's missing something that it had come to depend on, which is an addiction, right? And so if you take my bacon away from me, I'm not going to get a headache, or I'm not going to have anxiety. I'm not going to have emotional distress. I'm just going to move on with my life because I'm not addicted to bacon. But if someone's a sugar addict and you take all their bread and chips and crackers and sweets away from them, take away the fruit smoothies and take away the Cokes, they're going to have these physical signs and symptoms of addiction. That's another huge red flag, is if you've tried to stop sugar before and you had a headache and some of these other symptoms, you have a sugar addiction. I'm sorry, it may not be your fault, but it is your problem. Now, what are we going to do about this? So I want to go through about 7 or 8 steps. Not sure how many. If there's more than 7, then congratulations, you got a bonus. Number one is knowing that you have a sugar addiction, and knowing everything that sugar is in and everything you can get sugar from. So many people say, oh, I have a sugar addiction. I'm going to stop all the sweets and cookies and cakes and pies and candy, and that I'll break my sugar addiction. And so then they load up on the chips and the bread and the fruit smoothies and the Cokes, and they haven't affected their sugar addiction at all, because all of those foods are also loaded with glucose and fructose. And then also drinking a lot of milk is also full of lactose, another sugar. And so if you're really trying to break a sugar addiction, I would get all of those foods, including liquid milk, out of your diet completely. But you have to know what sugar's in. You have to know that all carbohydrates ultimately turn into glucose and fructose and maybe lactose. They turn into sugar. That's what carbohydrates are. And so you have to know that you have a sugar addiction, and you have to know where the sugar is hidden in order to break this addiction. Now, does Big Food want you to know this? Of course not. So they're going to tell you this stone ground, organic, non GMO wheat has nothing to do with sugar. But in the end, it breaks down into glucose and fructose sugar. Number two is staying full, because there's 2 parts to this, because food is a very complex addition, because you have hunger, which is a real thing. That's physiologically appropriate. If you need to eat for energy, then you're going to get hungry. So if you're hungry and the addiction is calling to you, that's stronger than any human can tolerate. And so I recommend to people trying to break a sugar addiction is to eat a diet like a low carb, high healthy fat diet, or a ketogenic diet, or even a carnivore diet, because these diets are going to keep you physiologically full. You're not going to be hungry because you're going to be eating lots of good healthy fats and lots of good healthy proteins and maybe a few healthy carbs, but you're not going to be eating the processed fast release carbs that lead to sugar addiction. And so you first of all, you've got your hunger satisfied. Now all you have to deal with is the addiction. And I think that makes it easier. Doesn't make it easy, makes it easier. And so stay full on protein and good healthy fats. And then you only have to deal with the craving part of the addiction and not hunger plus the addiction, which is almost impossible. Now, no, that's number two. Number three is to do things that stimulate dopamine production in your brain. And these are pleasurable things. And so you can read a book, you can go for a walk, you can go for a run, you can hug someone you love, you can have sex. good productive behavior that stimulates dopamine, you can do that and it will help you not crave sugar so bad. Sugar in all its forms, not just in the sweet form. Next is to clean out your kitchen. You have to get rid of all the sweets. You have to get rid of all the chips, whether the chips are made of corn, whether they're made of potatoes, it doesn't matter. They're just a processed carbohydrate that turn immediately into fructose and glucose, which is what's fueling your addiction. You have to clean your kitchen out, get rid of the milk, get rid of the fruit juices, get rid of the soft drinks, get rid of all the breads, get rid of all the potatoes and all of the snacks and treats and foods made with these things. Then, when you have that addiction, you can eat some fat and protein. So you've satisfied your hunger. Then, if you're still craving, then you can do one of the other dopamine releasing activities that I just talked about above. Next, I think this is a very important step, is to admit you're a sugar addict to your relatives. And they may laugh at you. They may say, that's not real. But I want you to be very earnest and very, very sincere and say, look, I'm a sugar addict. I need you to help me. I need your help. I'm trying to break this, and I want you to know about this so that when there's a special event comes up, you're not going to bring me that pie that you always make me for my birthday, or that cake, or that special bread you always bake. Don't bring me that stuff. I am a sugar addict. I'm trying to break this habit. Admit your habit to your loved ones and your friends. You don't have to admit it to everyone in the world unless you want to. That might actually help. But also in your Facebook groups, admit this. Admit this to your Facebook friends that you are a sugar addict and you're trying to break the addiction. Next is to make a plan. Now, some people, if they have an addiction, the best plan for them is to go cold turkey and just get rid of all of it and stop it immediately. For other people, it's to make a plan that's a month long or even 3 months long and slowly wean down the addictive substance over the next month or two or three. You know you better than I do. Which personality are you? And don't be playing reindeer games here. If you really need to cold turkey, then you need to cold turkey. But if that's not your style, it's okay. You don't have to quit your sugar addiction. You don't have to break it, go cold turkey today. You can do it over the next month or two. I think that's fine because you're ultimately moving towards better health and breaking an addiction. And I think that's a victory if you did better today than you did yesterday. And if you have plans to do better tomorrow than you did today. Next is to stay full. I already talked about this one. So stay full of good, healthy fats, good, healthy proteins, drink plenty of water, coffee, tea, whatever. But don't let yourself be in a situation where the craving is going to hit you and you're hungry at the same time. That's a bad combination. That's going to lead to failure. And then you'll be right back on the sugar train again. Next is to get plenty of sun and plenty of sleep. Both of these things really, the net effect is you get more dopamine, plus the hundreds of other health effects. Getting out in the sun every morning and getting a good night's sleep every night bring you. They are really, really good for you, but they also help keep your dopamine levels higher, which helps you fight this addiction. And lastly, but not leastly, is if you have another addiction, whether it's to drugs, alcohol, or tobacco, addictions are kind of like autoimmune conditions. They go hand in hand. And so that tobacco addiction, that smoking, is going to keep bringing up the sugar monster. I promise it will. And so I know it's going to be harder to quit two things at once instead of just one thing at a time, but you may have to consider doing that. If you have a problem with alcohol, that's going to absolutely feed back into your sugar problem, and they're going to build on each other, and you'll wind up failing at both. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please take 1 second and click that subscribe button right down there. It's right down there somewhere, and there's a little bell right beside it. Click that, so every time I have a bright idea, you'll be one of the very first to know. Nisha, my wife, and I go live on my Facebook page every Monday night at 7 p.m. Feel free to join us there if you have questions about this video or any of my other videos. This is Dr. Barry. I'll see you next time.